Hello and welcome back to the Theory Zone. This is all about Baudrillard's postmodernism, and it fits according to the specification in the media language section of media theory, although I think you'll find, hopefully as you see through this video, that there are quite a lot of ways in which it could fit as a representation theory, particularly within the representations of realism. However, I will caveat this video by saying that there is quite a lot at the beginning, probably more than half actually, that describes postmodernism as a concept, as a theory, as an idea, and some of the features that you might recognise in media products and texts that we would describe as postmodern. It's quite a tricky concept to try and describe, which is why there's so much sort of preamble, if you like. But overall, of course, the learning objectives of this video are that you do understand the main points of Baudrillard's theory, particularly his ideas surrounding simulations and simulacra. And of course, no good just learning the theory, you want to be able to apply it as well. So we'll look at this in relation to certain media products, but we should always be thinking of our set media products as well. So, straight on to postmodernism, which, as I've alluded to already, is a kind of tricky and fluid term to define. It often, though, refers to a movement or an era within a culture, or within the arts. So, I always find it's easier if you think of it in terms of the same way as we might consider a painting being described as Renaissance or Art Deco or modernist. A media text might be described as having postmodern features. And some of those features we're going to explore in the first part of this video. Some of these would include homage, pastiche, intertextuality, parody, and bricolage. Now, you're probably aware of maybe the meaning of one or two of those, or maybe more of those words, but maybe not all of them, and that's what we're going to look at in this video. However, it's really important at this stage to say postmodernism is not a genre of its own, and texts should not be described as such. It's always tempting because people might say, oh, this is a postmodern text, or that was particularly postmodern, to make, it's almost talked about as if it is a genre, but it's not. We're talking about this as a way of describing a text, okay? And it is difficult, and it is tricky, and undoubtedly this is the sort of thing to slip over. One does not simply define postmodernism. Well, we shall see how we go on with this. Meme culture itself is incredibly postmodern, and hopefully by the end of this session you'll understand why I'll have used that. So let's explore these postmodern features, and a parental advisory: this lesson may contain bad language and adult themes. No violence though, so not the 3 for 3. Let's get straight into it. And we're going to define the word parody. A parody is a work that mimics in an absurd or ridiculous way the conventions and style of another work in order to derive ridicule, to make ironic comment, or simply as affectionate fun towards whatever is being parodied. I don't know if you recognise the image, but it is from a very funny film called Team America, which is a parody of action films, amongst other things, created by the people who created South Park, Matt Stone and Trey Parker. It's well worth a watch. It ridicules a number of different conventions of Hollywood action films, as well as Hollywood itself. But we're not going to use that as our examples, okay? I'm going to give you a few different examples of parody, and obviously, hopefully, you'll think of your own examples as well. Let's start with a parody of advertising. Now, advertising is absolutely ripe for parody. The techniques, the devices, the aesthetic style, all of this that's used to sell us stuff that we don't really need have become so generic and familiar to us without even realising they're being used. We know the conventions of adverts without having to decode them at all, really. I'm going to show you a few adverts by a guy called Peter Serafinowicz. He's a comedian and an actor. He parodies adverts by using exaggeration and absurdism, either in the techniques used or the products advertised. So what you'll find is that there's a kind of bizarre familiarity with the products and the ideas behind this. I'll just show you a few of them, and you'll soon get the idea as to whether or not he's parodying, whether he's exaggerating the techniques that adverts use, or exaggerating the kind of products that, the sort of banal, weird products that you see on the TV. Anyway, Let's have a look at some of these advert parodies.
This kitchen is so hard to clean. If only there was an easier way.
Hi, I'm Derek Bum. Say goodbye to daily stains and dirty surfaces with new Kitchen Gun. This sink is filthy, but just 3 shots from Kitchen Gun and it sparkles like new. Look how it cleans this greasy hob. Goodbye, dirt! Grubby tiles! I love you, Kitchen Gun! Rusty taps! You can even use it on the washing up! There, all clean again! New Kitchen Gun, now with laser sight and night vision for after dark cleaning!
Do you like elephants? Do you like trains? Then you'll love Elephants and Trains magazine. Elephants and Trains magazine is the definitive guide for all elephant and train enthusiasts. And that's not all. Each week you'll be given the parts to build this terrifying model. Elephants and Trains magazine. Sold out.
Meats. Oh, here's the ham.
Oh, what about this brand? It's half the price of that brand.
Internet ham. What's that?
It's the new way to buy ham.
This is just a card. Where's the actual ham?
Our ham is produced totally online, so we can pass the savings on to you. Just scratch off the panel to get your ham ID, then enter it onto our website. And your ham is emailed to you almost instantly. You'll soon grow to love the weird taste of internet ham from Sinister. Would you like to have a live one-on-one chat with a caveman? Our gorgeous cavemen are waiting for your call. Dial 09098 798 790 now. Call Caveman Chat and get primitive.
Okay, so some pretty odd and bizarre stuff there, but really highlighting actually how the conventions of advertising itself, like I said, are so ingrained in our own minds, but also quite surreal in terms of the sort of products that we are offered and issued. Obviously, those products are utterly exaggerated or hybridized and stuff, but I think that gives you a sense of just sending a parody for advertising. Is there a point to it? Is there a purpose behind his parody? Probably not. It's probably just to create humour. It is there to sort of poke fun. I don't know if he's making any great comments on consumerist lifestyles or the maybe the ubiquity of advertising. Perhaps he is, but I get the feeling that that's more to do with just kind of creating a light-hearted twisting of conventions. Okay, let's move away from advertising and look at dramatic films. And of course, this is a medium and a genre within the medium of film that can be accused of taking themselves far too seriously. And also, even though they might be uber serious, unfortunately, a lot of dramatic films can become very cliched without even realising they're doing it. The following parody I'm going to show you is... I think it's called Parody of Award-Winning Dramatic Films or something like this, or every Oscar-winning film ever. And what it does is it plays on the conventions and tropes in a really clever and original way by making each of the conventions as explicit as possible. I'll say no more and I'll just show you this parody of dramatic films.
A toast. Establishing me as the wealthy, successful protagonist. Who is handsome?
Murmur of agreement.
Ambient sound.
Friendly concern that something may be missing from your life.
Confidence that nothing is missing in my life.
Interrupted statement about...
Reassurance that my good fortune will not waver.
Introduction of characters suffering from the most topical disability of the present year.
My catchphrase! Frustration with these new circumstances.
Admiration at your seeming selflessness.
Interest in your bold rejection of social norms as evidenced by your dyed hair.
My name.
My name. Catchphrase.
Relief at having found meaning in my life.
friendly concern that a string of heightened and seemingly unrelated plots may now arise.
Dude, differences are surfacing between us.
Accusations about your sexuality!
Suspicion that a character once thought trustworthy may not be trustworthy.
Also, I've got to use tough love to help this Latin American teenager believe in himself. Also, I must prove innocent this incredibly humble human male.
Also, I've decided to fight with the Native American metaphor against the American military metaphor.
Lead females name! Naive yet inspiring statement. And then the music gets hopeful.
Specific outlining of your major character flaws.
Overreaction! Friendly, black, optimistic advice.
Passionately! Whispered repetition.
This scene doesn't make it to the final cut of the movie.
Inspiring final lines of a speech that douchebags will quote in their Facebook profiles! Explicitly stating the moral of the story and awkwardly working in the movie title.
Oh, catchphrase!
Laugh. It's not going to be entirely a dramatic film, because we laughed there.
Brilliant. Okay, so as you can see, this is a sort of parody, as I said. Probably this one, more than just maybe poking fun, maybe a little bit of a sort of sly criticism, not even sly, I suppose, just a sort of dig at how some dramatic films do take themselves too seriously and how they've maybe become repetitive in their conventions and tropes, really. And of course, it's, you know, using the clever device of maybe just without having dialogue, just explaining what is going on as that convention, maybe pointing out that some films don't even need a story or dialogue, they just are so on the nose. And what you might have noticed, the most important thing, I suppose, is that obviously to get the joke of that video, you have to know the conventions of a dramatic film anyway, or you know, and even if you're not, you know, haven't explicitly sort of defined them for yourself, all of the things in that film do feel, in that short film, feel familiar, don't they? So what you might be seeing already with postmodernism, though, is that it does rely on an existing knowledge that the audience will have of the media. Postmodernism is often defined by the way it borrows and uses existing media. And that really ties in nicely with my third and final example of parody. We're going to look at how the news can be parodied. So, far from being a straightforward representation of world events, broadcast news is, of course, constructed to meet our expectations, but also it is used, it has to be said, to occasionally shock and surprise us. You know, we're quite, that's debatable, I suppose, but I believe we're quite lucky having the BBC as a sort of impartial, independent broadcaster, and I know that will cause much debate, but certainly if we look over the pond to our American friends, we'll see that a lot of their news broadcasters use incredible sensationalism in their news broadcasting, and it just highlights the fact that the reality of the world is constructed into sections and into stories and things like that. Now, Cassette Boy, you may have seen his work before, a brilliant internet artist, I suppose you might describe him as, who re-edits parts of speeches, people's dialogue, usually factual and real people's, politicians, kind of speeches and things like that, often set to music. And this is the cassette boy is showing up the absurdity and the constructed nature of news by pulling apart the news into its tiny fragments and then putting it back together again to represent something altogether different from reality. You'll get what I mean as soon as you see it. This is Cassette Boy versus the news.
OK, hello. The BBC has won a High Court battle for the right to broadcast child pornography, and there could be more bad news on the way. Good evening and welcome to the BBC's news taken out of context. Our top story tonight. The battle over bonuses is far from over. Hundreds of city traders and bankers wearing balaclavas ambushed the Royal Bank of Scotland today. Business tycoons carrying sledgehammers smashed Britain's biggest bank, shoplifting their multi-million-pound bonuses. Police have described the high-flying bosses as dangerous. But first, tonight, the celebrity chef Anthony Worrell Thompson has delivered a defiant speech at his local branch of Tesco. He promised to use an iron fist to deal with protests against his TV programmes. When it comes to alcohol, how much is too much? The court in Paris said it's up to Scotland to decide. They say you should have 300 units every 45 minutes and stop off for a beer on the way home. That's already a guideline in Scotland. Our correspondent, Jeremy Cook, has been focusing on the market town of Hereford.
Hereford. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Hereford.
A reminder of tonight's main salacious gossip. There's been a shocked response around the world to video footage appearing to show US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton urinating on Boris Johnson for an ITV programme. It was deplorable behaviour. The Labour leader Ed Miliband has told the BBC that his cocks remained untouched for thousands of years and maybe, just maybe, the longest on record for a British citizen. Thousands of women remain confused and worried. The government says it has no plans to get the economy moving again. But David Cameron said the Olympic Games and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee would provide opportunities to showcase the country struggling to pay the bills. In the meantime, there are still plenty of people who want to kill off David Cameron. But today there was a rare display of unity in the Commons as David Cameron and the Labour leader Ed Miliband both decided that they should be allowed to end their own lives. And Nick is in Westminster for us. What's David Cameron actually up to?
The British Prime Minister is a posh English queen. He has his own dick up his arse.
Nick, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Okay, so obviously clever editing and a lot of patience, I guess, to deconstruct the news and, as I said, throw it back together again, heightening our sense that the news is a construction in the first place, but also making slight jabs from a political point of view, maybe not just the news being the target there, but also politics also as well. And that might wander into another sort of postmodern, I suppose, convention or feature that we might regard as satire, but more about that later. So just a few more bits on parody. Some theorists or genre theorists see parody as actually a natural development in the life cycle of a genre. So such theorists note that Western movies, for example, after the classic stage, which probably appeared in the 1950s, defined the convention of the genre. They went through a parody stage in which those same conventions were ridiculed and even critiqued. Because audiences had seen classic westerns, they obviously had expectations for new westerns, and when those expectations were subverted, the audience laughed. So it's that idea of you have to have conventions of something set up and established before you can mock them. Most of the humour in recent parodies of films is based on our own familiarity with the formulaic plots, conventions and characters. So there have been a spate of parody movies over the past few years. Films like Scary Movie, Not Another Teen Movie, Team America, which I mentioned. All of them first build on our habitual expectations of the genre and then violate those expectations. Because each of these films incorporates the plot, characters and conventions of dozens of films, they can be helpful in studying the genres they parody. And as a teacher of media and film, it's always really useful to use parody as a way of showing up conventions, as we did with that dramatic film parody earlier. Now, parody itself has, if you like, its own subset of conventions. One of these would be self-parody, in which artists satirise themselves. If you've ever seen the Ricky Gervais programme Extras, it sort of satirises a sort of version of Ricky himself when he was a sort of struggling actor trying to get work. Or if you've ever seen the brilliant characterisation of Puss in Boots in any of the Shrek movies, Antonio Banderas kind of satirises the sort of role he's used to playing, a parody of his own performance as the masked hero Zorro in some films from the 90s. Or an artist or a genre that repeats elements of earlier work to the point where originality is lost even. We might describe Sylvester Stallone's performances in some of the later Rocky films, but maybe not the Creed movies, but certainly some of the later Rocky films, particularly Rocky Balboa, bears very little resemblance to the kind of character he constructed in that original Rocky movie. But anyway, I'm going to use Ricky Gervais as our example for self-parody here. Amongst his many very brilliantly written series, Gervais actually directed, but didn't star in. He was kind of a bit part in a mockumentary series called Life is Short, which makes fun of the actor Warwick Davis's attempt to stay relevant as an actor, but also it mocks kind of Ricky Gervais's own success, and the fact that maybe his success is built around apparently flimsy foundations. And of course the show, like many of Gervais's shows since The Office, has plenty of guest stars in it who mock their own personas.
Here they are, the lads. Jonesy.
Hi. Hello, lads.
So I'm popping here, what, every other day to see you guys, aren't I?
Seems like it.
Yeah. Have you met before? Johnny, this is Stephen.
Hello, all right, nice to meet you.
No. And Ricky there.
I actually remember him from the Golden Globes. Hi.
Yeah.
How's it going? I'm fine, man. Just doing another film that's gonna make loads of money. Probably a lot more money than any film you've ever made. Good. And you?
Yeah, just writing and I write and direct all my own stuff.
How great for you. That must be so great. You know, I'm working with a great director right now, a guy named Tim Burton. Have you ever heard of him?
Of course.
Yeah. The film itself is really brilliant, and I'm playing a very interesting character. Do you have any idea who my leading lady is on this film?
In the Tim Burton film?
Yeah.
Helena Bonham Carter?
How'd you know?
Stab in the dark.
She thinks you're an idiot.
Sorry, have I done something to offend you?
What do you mean, like trashing me in front of like 200 million people at the Golden Globes?
It was a while ago. They were jokes, Johnny. I didn't...
Oh, they were jokes?
Yeah.
You like jokes?
Yes.
Good. Because I actually got together with a few pals after the awards, and we wrote some jokes about you. And I want you to know this, and I'm going to carry this with you for the rest of your days. No one makes fun of Tim Allen on my watch and gets away with it. Don't say anything. Just keep that in you, okay? Here are my jokes. What is nastier than Ricky Gervais's jokes? His teeth. Why do people take an instant dislike to Ricky Gervais? Because it saves time. Why did Ricky Gervais do a series of audiobooks? So that the blind could hate him as well. Now this is from Angelina. Tell Ricky Gervais that me and Brad have a picture of him on our mantelpiece because it keeps the kids away from the fire. And why isn't Ricky Gervais circumcised? Because there's no end to that prick. Did you quit Twitter recently?
Well, about 2 years ago. Yeah.
But you quit Twitter?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you not quit because it only has 140 characters?
Well, the joke I made at the time was, I'm so verbose that I can't say everything in 140 letters, so I...
Right.
Do the joke. What's the joke?
I hear that Ricky Gervais quit Twitter recently because it only has 140 characters. Well, that's 139 more characters than he's ever come up with.
Good joke. I mean, the telling of it took about as long as Pirates of the Caribbean 3, but yeah, it's a good joke.
You're laughing.
Well, no, he was just...
You fucking laughed. What are you, dissing pirates now? Really?
It's a good movie, that was. Just a bit long, though. So what you picked up on?
People love that movie.
Oh, yeah.
What is wrong with you people? Come on, seriously. I mean, why do you pick on movie stars? What have I done wrong?
Picking on...
I'm trying to express myself, man. I'm trying to help people.
Sure.
I'm trying to give joy to the masses.
Right.
Is that a crime? Is that a crime? Seriously. No. No more. No more.
These Hollywood stars are so touching, aren't they? It's just...
Tell me about it.
So there you go, it's a bit of self-parody from everyone involved there. Actors playing themselves in a sitcom. Johnny Depp sending up the idea that he's a sort of pretentious and over-the-top actor who's incredibly precious about his representation and his personality, but also Gervais laughing at himself, really picking at the fact that perhaps his fame and stardom is built around just maybe very few successes. So there you go, examples of self-parody. But we'll move on to a term that you're probably less familiar with, and that is pastiche. And pastiche is really, to give a certain dictionary definition, a medley of various ingredients, a hodgepodge, a farrago, a jumble. All fantastic words, but what do we mean by that? Well, the term denotes a technique of employing a generally light-hearted, tongue-in-cheek imitation of another style. And although this could be in a jokey way, it's usually respectful, as opposed to parody, which is sometimes a bit more kind of having a dig, perhaps. But more than anything, pastiche is about borrowing from lots of places, sort of accumulating lots of different reference points. The poster there is for This Is Spinal Tap, an absolutely fantastic movie from the early 80s, which is filmed as a rock documentary or rockumentary, but is entirely scripted. It parodies the form of rock documentaries. It parodies the industry of kind of rock music, in particular the kind of big hair rock bands of the 1980s, and there are lots of different parodies of characters, but it borrows from so many places. All of the songs were written by the people who wrote the film. The script is fantastic. It really is a pastiche, a collection of lots of different influences and genres within both music and film. So pastiche is prominent in popular culture. Many genre pieces, particularly in fantasy, are essentially pastiches. The image of Darth Vader there is no accident. George Lucas's Star Wars is often considered to be a pastiche of traditional science fiction, but also television serials, adventure serials, radio shows, westerns. There are lots of different influences. Samurai movies. It's a film which employed incredible special effects, but also has an orchestral classical score to it. Star Wars is a great example of pastiche, borrowing from bits and pieces of culture here and there to make the final product. Another filmmaker other than Lucas, I suppose, more modern, would be Quentin Tarantino. His films are often described as pastiches as they mix and blur the different generic conventions and boundaries. Kill Bill, for example, pays tribute, or perhaps even imitates numerous genres such as the pulp novel, the blaxploitation movie, the grindhouse film, kung fu and western films. Although some of people would say his films are more of an homage to these ideas, there's no doubting that he borrows from so many places that they are pastiche. I'm not going to use Kill Bill as my example. I'm going to show you the trailer for Tarantino's movie Django Unchained. So have a quick look at this. How many different genres are referred to in this single trailer? Think about the music as well as what's going on in the actual film. And also consider, are the choice of stars significant? Anyway, I'll play the trailer, have some thoughts, and we'll see how we can consider this pastiche afterwards.
No grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body down.
Good cold evening, gentlemen. Amongst your inventory, I've been led to believe is a specimen I'm keen to acquire.
When I hear that trumpet sound,
What's your name?
I'm gonna rise right out of the ground.
Django. Then you're exactly the one I'm looking for.
Hey, stop talking to him.
Calm down. I'm simply a customer trying to conduct a transaction.
Last chance, fancy pants.
Oh, very well.
Do you know what a bounty hunter is? You kill people, and they give you a reward.
Better. They are bigger the reward. I need your help. I'm looking for the Brittle Brothers. However, I don't know what they look like, but you do. Don't you?
They caught my wife, and they sold her, but I don't know who to.
That means we visit every plantation until we find them. Once a final Brittle Brother lies dead in the dust, I agree to give you your freedom. And I'll take you to rescue your wife.
Where are we going?
Yes!
Gentlemen, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention.
How do you like the bounty hunting business?
Kill white folks and they pay you for it? What's not to like? I like the way you die, boy.
He is a rambunctious sword, ain't he?
What's your name? Django.
The D is silent.
Okay, so of course there's a lot about that feels very typical of a Tarantino movie, and some might even say that that's possibly one of the genres he's borrowed from, as his work tends to kind of repeat itself quite a lot, although that also opens up the auteur theory. But let's look at some of the kind of solid foundations of this, and let's look at some of the definites in which it's borrowed from. Of course, it looks like a Western film. It's set in a what looks like to be a around the Civil War era period in the southern states of the USA, and that usually means it's of the Western genre, which it certainly is, and it has the iconography of that. However, there are other genres as well that are referenced. In part, it looks like a 1980s buddy movie. The 80s became kind of quite synonymous with sort of cop films where there would be two cops, it has to be said, usually one white male and one black male, that work together, that should have differences but ultimately make a good team. So that's kind of referenced there. There is also references to a genre of movies from the 1970s called the blaxploitation movement, films which had sort of prominent black characters for the first time, and really exploited the fact that there was a new and a black audience that hadn't been reached before. And these were often sort of crime and violent movies that sort of depicted sort of crime and violence in a gritty, realistic way. If you listen to the soundtrack, we've got a whole host of things going on. Never really a traditional Westerns soundtrack, but we do have Johnny Cash, who is of course known for his sort of country music in a kind of a certain style, and was making records from the 1950s, well, really for a good 50 years. And then overlaying that, we had funk music from, again, more synonymous with maybe the 1970s. So we've got a lot going on here. And even if we think of the choice of stars, you know, even if Jamie Foxx and Christoph Waltz are our main characters, the villain of the piece is Leonardo DiCaprio, arguably playing against type, as we usually know him as being the hero of most films, you know, this ultimate movie star. So it's borrowing from lots of different places. It relies on the audience's knowledge of a lot of different media products and texts, including Tarantino's earlier work. And this would be a good example of what we call pastiche. The next term is intertextuality, and one that you've probably heard before, and certainly one that we've looked at in the course. Intertextuality is really the shaping of text's meaning by other texts. It can refer to an author's borrowing and transformation of a prior text, or to a reader referencing of one text in reading another. I'm sure a lot of you recognise the image there. It's a sort of an illustrated image for the TV series Stranger Things, which borrows a lot from different 1980s pop culture references and films. But I'm not going to use Stranger Things for my example. I'm going to use a sitcom that finished many years ago now, but one that I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is from Friends. And I'm using this really because intertextuality is not just there often for the sake of it. It can be there as a reward to the audience. What's interesting about this sequence you'll see is that there are a number of different intertextual references, although I think there are some quite distinct audiences or different audiences that would get each of the reference points. Now this, as I said, is a show that was finished in 2004, started in 1994, so it's a very old show now, 26, 27 years old. At the same time, it's repeated endlessly, so I'm sure you've seen a few episodes. The situation of this particular sequence is that Joey has just given Chandler, his friend, a gold friendship bracelet as a present, but Chandler doesn't like it. However, he wears the bracelet for Joey so as not to hurt his feelings. And that's what's happening in the scene.
I know what you're thinking. Dave Thomas, founder of Wendy's.
I'm Gail.
Chandler.
I really have to be somewhere, but it was nice meeting you.
What? Oh, this is excellent. You know, he could have got me a VCR, he could have got me a set of golf clubs, but no, he has to get me the woman repeller. The eyesore from the Liberace House of Crap.
Not that bad.
Oh, yeah, easy for you to say. You don't have to walk around sporting some reject from the Mr. T collection.
Chandler.
I pity the fool who puts on my jewelry. I do. I pity the fool that Hey, man, we were just doing some impressions over here. Do your Marcel Marceau. That's actually good.
So fairly typical stuff from Friends in terms of the setup of the storyline. But interestingly, in that 190-second sequence, we had a number of different intertextual references. How many did you get? Well, there were actually 4 in that short sequence, 4 different references to other media or other cultural texts, if you like. The final one, which is probably the one, well, there's a few you might not have got here, but the final one where Chandler asked Joey to do his impressions of Marcel Marceau. And you could probably guess from Joey's reaction and Chandler saying it was quite good. Marcel Marceau was a famous mime artist. Seems odd these days to have famous mime artists, but certainly for an older generation, Marcel Marceau was famous for movies and stage performances as a mime artist for many, many years. And certainly that would have probably been more applicable to the very sort of older end of an audience group there. So who else was referenced? Well, the one that's most commonly spotted is Mr. T, the 1980s action star associated with TV shows like The A-Team and films like Rocky III. I pity the fool, a catchphrase of his, is still referenced in media products today, most recently I think in a Snickers advert. But certainly an audience of maybe 20-somethings when Friends came out would remember Mr. T from the 1980s. So you've got that kind of younger audience there. But however, there are 2 more. One of them was Liberace, okay. Chandler says that the bracelet could be from could be considered an eyesore from the Liberace House of Crap. This is basically a reference to the flamboyant pianist and performer Liberace, who was famous during the 1970s for wearing extravagant costumes, but also being a very talented piano player. But of course that's for an audience maybe older than those who would have got the Mr. T reference, perhaps younger than those who would know who Marcel Marceau was. So you've got maybe a 30-something, 40-something audience being appealed to by that reference. And then first off the bat, when Chandler approaches the woman to try and speak to her, he says, "I know what you're thinking, Dave Thomas from the Wendy's commercials." Now, I have to admit, this is the one that I wasn't aware of at all. But apparently Dave Thomas was the founder of Wendy's, which is a burger chain, a fast food chain in the United States. Now, why people would know the founder of a fast food chain seemed kind of strange to me, but apparently during that era that Friends was on in the 1990s, Dave Thomas appeared in his own commercials for Wendy's, not just a few of them, but hundreds of them. And so anybody familiar with, I suppose, commercials that were going on in TV at that time would have been familiar with Dave Thomas from Wendy's. So there you go, a 90-second scene from an episode of a sitcom to convey two friends falling out, and yet there are 4 different intertextual references, each one possibly getting a laugh from a different generation of audience. Okay, let's move from intertextuality to something called homage. Now, homage is generally used to mean any public show of respect to someone who you feel indebted. In this sense, a reference within a creative work to someone who greatly influenced the artist would be an homage. So my image here is a screenshot or a still from Jonathan Glazer's music video for Blur's song The Universal, which, if you've ever seen it, borrows a lot from Stanley Kubrick's film A Clockwork Orange in its style and its mise-en-scène, and it's quite clearly referencing it. It's not trying to get away with plagiarism. It is a nod to a hat tip, a tribute, and that's what homage is. It is a tribute to something. It's not trying to get away with just borrowing for the sake of it. It is paying its respects. But I'm not going to use the Universal as my example. I'm actually going to go back in time quite a way, back to the 1980s. I'm going to show you the very first advert for the very first Apple Mac home computer. Now, the advert's message is really an attack on the dominance of another computer company, not Microsoft, but a company called IBM, who at that time absolutely had the lion's share of the home computer market, and Apple was this plucky little independent company who were trying to do things differently, who were attacking the dominance in the market of such a big corporation. Yes, we'll leave the irony at the door, but yes, got to put that in context. Apple were small, they were doing things differently, and they were seriously thinking about challenging the stranglehold that IBM had on computers in the 1980s. And this was an advert made in 1984. As we'll see, it pays homage and tribute to that great novel, 1984.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of a contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So this advert was actually award-winning. It was created a big high-profile ad campaign comparing the IBM computer system to the Big Brother character in George Orwell's 1984, a totalitarian state controlled by people who were staring at screens all the time and told what to do, and made to do exercises. Okay, quite interesting vision of the future. But you know, they're not hiding the fact that they're borrowing from this as a reference point. It is definitely a tribute to the book and to the representation of the book. So that's homage. Let's move on to another feature called self-referential, okay, or self-referentiality. But this is basically the idea of texts that break the fourth wall. These are texts that know that they are media texts. They are subtly or obviously referring to the fact that they're a piece of constructed media. Okay, they break that fourth wall, that invisible wall between the audience and the text, and refer to themselves. A bit like self-parody, okay? But lots of different types of media do this. However, it's probably most notable in film, because film always works hard to encourage the audience to buy into the reality of the narrative it sets up. Irrespective of genre, it doesn't really matter what genre a movie is, a movie wants you to escape from the world it creates. Breaking the fourth wall yanks you straight out of that and dumps you back in the cinema. It makes you totally aware of the fact that you're watching a movie. So here's some examples of fourth wall breaks, or what we would refer to as self-referential movies.
I'll be home at 6 sharp. If you need anything, call.
I love you, sweetie.
Call if you need us.
They bought it.
Pardon me while I have a strange interlude. Hey, you couple of baboons.
What are you looking at?
Breaking the fourth wall is one of the most unique thematic devices at the disposal of a filmmaker. Most cinematic techniques pull us into a story and make us forget we're watching a film, but breaking the fourth wall does the opposite. It reminds us we're actually an audience member watching what's happening on screen.
I can't believe we're paying to see something we get on TV for free. If you ask me, everybody in this theater is a giant sucker. Especially you!
The technique can contribute to the visual storytelling of a film in many different ways depending on how it's presented. To really understand the power of breaking the fourth wall, we have to look at its inception and theatrical performance.
A fiddler on the roof. Sounds crazy, no?
A formal definition for breaking the fourth wall would be a dramatic technique in a work of fiction where characters display an awareness that they are in such a work.
You might say every one of us is a fiddler on the roof.
The technique goes as far back as ancient Greece and continued through Shakespeare time and well into postmodern theater, especially musicals. The term first arose after the use of box sets became popular in the 1800s, when sets were constructed with 3 walls, the fourth wall being the imaginary wall between the audience and the performers on stage. So whenever a character acknowledged the audience's presence, the fourth wall was broken. The technique has been used since the silent era, and Charlie Chaplin played around extensively with fourth wall breaks in his films. With the introduction of sound and the popularity of the musical genre, fourth wall breaks became more common to contribute to the spectacle of film. And over the next 70 years, fourth wall breaks have made their way into a variety of film genres with a variety of thematic effects.
Were they all singing, all dancing crap at the world?
The most popular use of this technique is for comedy, and the comedy stands out by creating some of the most memorable punchlines in cinematic history.
Oh, do you? Yeah. Well, that's funny because I happen to have Mr. McLuhan right here. So, yeah, just let me, come over here a second.
Oh,
Tell him.
I heard what you were saying. You know nothing of my work. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong. How you ever got to teach a course in anything is totally amazing.
Boy, if life were only like this.
There's something really surprising and hilarious about reminding us that we're in the middle of watching a film. No matter how many times I watch a movie break the fourth wall, the joke can still catch me by surprise.
What a pisser.
The joke has to step out of the film to deliver the punchline, and there's really no other type of joke like it. Every other joke is enclosed within the imaginary world of the art form. Taking that step out of a movie is what makes a good fourth wall joke so satisfying and creative.
Well, that's where I see things just a little differently. Contract or no, I will not bow to any sponsor.
I do want to note that breaking the fourth wall doesn't automatically make you a comedic genius. The setup and delivery of a fourth wall break has to be at least somewhat surprising, or the joke can come off as kind of lazy.
Jay and Silent Bob movie? Who would pay to see that?
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
Stumble across it, actually, and wondered what it was, and they'll be miles away by now, and I expect we'll have to take all of the blame, as usual.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the middle of the film.
Much better. You can't talk about breaking the fourth wall without mentioning Mel Brooks. He broke the fourth wall in the most extreme ways possible.
I lost. Wait a minute, I'm not supposed to lose. Let me see the script.
His films go so far as to actually have the main characters watch themselves within the movie.
Stop. What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
Well, what do you want to do now?
Come on, let's check out the end of the flick.
Yeah. Gee, I sure hope there's a happy ending.
While his films are funny because of their ridiculousness, there's definitely some method to his madness. I like how Blazing Saddles uses fourth wall breaks to poke fun at the Western genre as a whole. It really points out how unrealistic Hollywood films were in their portrayal of life in the West. In reality, Western films were nothing but actors in a studio acting in fake towns and eventually getting into a car to drive off the set. Blazing Saddles is a not-so-subtle reminder that film as an art form has its limitations at portraying reality. Mel Brooks made a statement by pointing out the lack of realism in the Western film. Western films of the 40s, 50s, and 60s almost completely ignore racism, xenophobia, and other ugly parts of the West. And Blazing Saddles breaks the fourth wall in an insane way to remind us we're watching a dramatized film, not reality.
Could have thought of another way to get us here.
There we go again, Junior. We're off on the...
Perhaps what makes breaking the fourth wall the most intriguing is that depending on its context, the act of acknowledging the audience can actually push us into the film instead of pulling us out. There's a sort of intimacy to a character speaking directly to us. In Road to Morocco, Bing Crosby and Bob Hope make lighthearted jokes straight to the audience and even remind us that they're going to end up fine on their adventure.
For any villains we may meet, we haven't any fear. Paramount will protect us 'cause we're signed for 5 more years.
We know from the casual and inviting fourth wall breaks that this is a movie that doesn't take itself too seriously and will provide light, conservative entertainment. Fourth wall breaks can be a way to welcome us into the story, and this variation of the technique is definitely indicative of a more casual movie.
We're Morocco bound.
A fourth wall break can make us intimate with a character as well as with a story. There's really no stronger way to show a character's motives than by having them look right at us and say them.
If I go for 10, I'm probably gonna have to barf up a lung. So I better make this one count.
It's a great way to show us what's going on in a character's head and is comparable to an aside in theater. Frank Underwood addressing us directly is the foundation for so much of the energy in House of Cards.
Good, and Donald, don't let this get you down. Why, together we're gonna do more than you've been able to do in 25 years.
I love the scenes where he says one thing to another character and then looks at us and reminds us what he's really after.
2 things are now irrelevant. Donald Blythe and Donald Blythe's new draft. Eventually I'll have to rewrite the bill myself. Forward, that is the battle cry. Leave ideology to the armchair generals. Does me no good.
The final great effect of breaking the fourth wall is to unsettle. There's nothing scarier than feeling safe and removed from the villain in a movie and then having that villain look directly at you.
I hope they are watching. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know. And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
Yikes. Comedy, satire, intimacy, and fear can all be accomplished just from a look to the camera. So don't forget the great potential a fourth wall break can have, and thanks for watching.
What are you doing in here? This is my room. Get out! Get out! I'm making the video! Get out! Hello! What does a guy have to do to get some privacy around here?
So there we go. That's fourth wall breaking, or what we refer to as self-referentiality. Okay, another feature of postmodernism, and again, probably a word that you've heard of, maybe you studied before in other subjects, possibly in English literature or drama. This is satire, and this isn't necessarily something that is arrived with postmodernism. It precedes postmodernism by a long way. Satire has been a feature of the literature tradition for hundreds of years. but it's a technique in which a target is held up for merciless ridicule. And because satire often combines anger as well as humour, it can be profoundly disturbing. Because it's essentially ironic and sarcastic, it can often be misunderstood as well. Satire is usually witty and often very funny. The primary purpose of satire is not necessarily humour every time, but criticism of an individual or a group or an institution in a witty manner. A few examples there: Larry David, Steve Coogan's fantastic character Alan Partridge. At the top is a writer, director and satirist called Chris Morris, and probably more familiar to you at the bottom is Sacha Baron Cohen, who satirises different forms of media and institutions in his characters there as Borat. But one media product that I could have used for all of the different examples, homage, pastiche, parody, self-referentiality, is The Simpsons, which has dozens of intertextual references per episode. You can count them off. Some of them are very obscure, some of them are very obvious. But I've saved this till the last as a way of showing you satire. And of course, as it says here, the Simpsons are all kind of postmodern. But this particular opening sequence, interestingly directed by the street artist Banksy, is actually a reaction to the working conditions of the writers of the actual show itself. So it is using intertextuality, it is self-referential, it is self-parody, but it is deeply satirical and quite disturbing. So this is a Banksy-directed opening sequence, which is so familiar to us. If you've ever seen The Simpsons, you know that the opening sequences are always iconic, but this one is taking a swipe at the working conditions of the illustrators and writers of the show. So, as I said, pretty dark in its tone and its content, satirising the fact that as an audience we don't maybe understand what goes into the idea of making something with references to sweatshops and broken dreams. There's rather disturbing images of pandas and dolphin heads being used to create the merchandising, maybe an attack on consumerism and capitalism, and as always an attack on Fox, which produces The Simpsons, and has been a target for their kind of sideswiping for many years now. So lots going on there, but a great example of satire. Now, there are a number of texts that you can probably think of or possibly be aware of that uses all of these different techniques or not techniques, characteristics, shall we say. And whilst it's important to remember that these criteria are features of a postmodern text, many of them do actually predate the era of postmodernism. You know, there has been parody for centuries, there's been satire for centuries. However, where these features are used and combined in a way that distorts a representation of reality or changes the way that we see the media itself, it may be reasonable to describe the text as a product of a postmodern era. So I would encourage you to think of examples and find products that you know that have these postmodern traits and features that do distort the way we see the media. If you can't think of any, and if you're looking for a text to analyse that does do this, I'm going to recommend one called Too Many Cooks, but I'm not going to screen it here. Do watch it. It's a surreal, ridiculous, funny, sometimes terrifyingly bizarre and odd comedy production called Too Many Cooks. I wouldn't even know how to define it. Have a think, have a look at what texts are being referenced, what genres are being parodied. Think of it as, why is it an example of pastiche, a perfect example of pastiche? A couple of questions I don't know if I could definitely answer. Is it satirical? If it is satirical, what point is it trying to make about the media? Or is it possibly a comment on something else? You decide. Do watch the show, the video. It's about 10 or 11 minutes long. You can find it easily on YouTube. It's incredibly clever and very, very strange. But I think it's a perfect example of postmodernism. And as I said, it might even have something to say. And if that something to say is a comment on originality or realism, then perhaps we can relate it to the ideas of Jean Baudrillard. But that's something that we can explore in the second part of this video on postmodernism. Thanks for listening to the first part. And yeah, there'll be a second video to accompany this, which is specifically about Baudrillard's ideas. Thanks very much.